Welcome to Women in B2B Marketing, a show where CMOs, VPs of marketing, and all strong women leaders in B2B discuss their top tactics, strategies, and tips for building high-performing teams, leveraging trends, and ultimately rocking their marketing careers. Made by and for women, insightful for all. I'm your host and 15-year B2B marketer, Jane Serra. Let's dive in. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us for a special episode of Women in B2B Marketing, the very first inaugural roundtable. So I'm so excited to have with us today. We have Dina Otero, the VP of Demand Gen from Mission Cloud. We have Karrie Sanderson, CMO and GTM strategist. And we have Julie Polito, VP of Marketing at WIB2BM. And we are here together. Thank you, everyone, for joining to discuss. Hi. A very hot topic. So the four of us met a few weeks ago now at the CMO Coffee Talk, which, by the way, everyone check this out. It is amazing. 6 Sense and Matt Hines run this, and it's amazing. But the comment section, the chat, is always very, very active. We're a chatty bunch. And a comment was made on the side that got all of us talking in a thread inside the chat that we figured we needed to record and unpack together live on this. So the comment that was made was from a man. Again, we are not here to shame this man by any means. I won't name him, and I'm sure he meant nothing bad by this. But he made a comment. Yeah, men are people too. Great hashtag. His comment was, as a 3-time CEO, I would suggest that women in particular have immediate credibility in marketing. And he went on to say that he's seen way more women in marketing roles than versus finance or engineering. So let's unpack this. And Julie, you go first, because I know you had a great follow-up question of, do people see marketing as a pink collar job? Is that what this is implying? So dive into it.
Yeah, 2 things jumped out at me when he made that comment. Bless his heart. I know, assume positive intent at all times. And I think that most people have positive intent around these comments, but they just kind of don't know how it comes out. But anyway, the 2 things that came up for me when I saw that was, first of all, I always want, if it's a CEO who's a man who says something like that, I always want to say, who's your CMO? And what gender are they? Because more often than not, although less lately than it has been in the past, people say things like that, and then you look at their masthead or their about page, and it's a dude as the CMO. Yeah. So where's the credible woman that you get excited about? Not on your C-suite. Yeah. So that's one thing that kind of jumped out at me. Yeah. Immediately.
I see it. I just don't hire myself, but I've seen it out there.
I've seen it. Other people do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that it kind of brought up for me, and I own my own issues, but when I was a baby, getting started in my career, I was an editorial assistant at a magazine. And one time I was in an event with the publisher of the magazine, who was a white man. And I think every woman has experienced some flavor of this, where you walk up and the big boss puts his arm around you and says, this is our editorial assistant. And this little lady secretly runs the whole thing. Her. And you're kind of like, yeah. I mean, I was like, yeah, okay, bite me. But, it's just one of those things that is so disingenuous and patronizing, and the opposite of what you think they actually believe. That I feel like everybody has been through that at some point. And it's just like, come on. It's great if you think I do my job well, but saying something like that it's like, come on, dude.
Yeah. Patronizing is a great word for that. It's like an underhanded compliment, but times 5. I hear you. Yeah.
It's almost like patting you on the head, and it's like, good job, little girl.
Yeah.
It's very patronizing. Yeah.
Do you all even remember what sparked this comment? Because I was trying to think back even right after I wrote this, and I don't recall there being contexts that warranted this kind of strange comment.
No, there wasn't.
I don't.
No. The context of the conversation, I think the topic was around, just the challenges right now of being a CMO. We'd gotten off on a tangent about finding roles and hiring. And so it kind of came in from left field. I mean, for me, my reaction to the comment was, okay, observationally, I don't disagree that there typically are more, and this is a community of C-suite leaders, right? CMOs. So we interact with other C-suite leaders. And at least in technology, for sure, most of the C-suites that I've been exposed to are the female representation is HR and marketing when they're there. Very rarely do you see, I've had the pleasure of working with a female CFO, but it's mostly male dominated. And my reaction to that was like, okay, observationally, yes. However, my other observation, and then I'm an engineer by education, like I got a master's in engineering, so I'm very used to working in male dominated environments, is to go get the data. And what I found was it's true, but right now it's the data is there's like half of women overall CMOs versus half men. And so it's like this parity feels like more is what I instantly felt like when equality felt like there's more women. It's like, no, it's actually equal. And if you go into tech, it's a lot worse. It's like 70% men, 30% women. And then the worst part of it is that it starts out at the entry level of it's a lot more women than men in marketing. But as you go up the ladder, they talk about this thing called a broken rung, where moving into management and senior management, significantly fewer and fewer women. So even though there's more women in the pool, the talent pool to begin with in entry-level marketing, by the time you get to that leadership position, some of those perceptions about leadership being male-dominated start to show themselves, even in marketing at the C-suite level. So that was really interesting. And then, of course, the intersectionality, that's women overall, it's abysmal. If you go into race, ethnic diversity, it's even worse. So I mean, maybe as compared to some, as my favorite Princess Bride movie would say, only compared to some, is it more women, but there's still fundamentally and systemically some serious problems about promotion and the role that we're allowed to play.
Yes, that's a great point.
So my interpretation of the comment was almost backwards. It was almost like it was gender profiling. So the comment was, women will naturally have more credibility because there are more female CMOs. While that's factually correct or incorrect, okay, let's take the comment at face value. But does that mean then female CFOs immediately get less credibility because they are the minority gender, and male CMOs immediately get less credibility because they're the minority in that role? So it almost and I think the answer is no, and I hope the answer is no, but just when you really think about it, that comment at that absolute face value, it just felt it was such a broad profiling comment that really had no facts behind it whatsoever. I don't know how this person will react, by the way, by us doing an entire conversation dissecting.
Let's be honest, he will never see this.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be really interesting though. I love that point too, because it's, it's true. Like, what does that mean? And to me, another concerning trend, again, because I looked in the data, is marketing such a diverse group of skill sets, right? Like I came up through like insights and strategy and brand are the main part of my core experience. I've run entire organizations with demand gen and revenue and all pipeline and all that kind of thing. But in marketing also, typically those more data-driven roles tend to be held by men in marketing, and the more creative roles tend to be held by women. And this trend now of rolling marketing leaders under CROs, under COOs, that happened to me at my last role. It was like marketing got moved under a CRO into the data side. Like, I think there's also a danger in this perception of the marketing part where women have more credibility. Is that on the creative empathy, that gender stereotype role versus the data and the science part of it, right? So I've thought about this through a lot of different angles, and that was another one. Is it? Yeah, it's the soft skills, it's the empathy. It's why women would have more credibility in marketing. To your point, Dina, or is it just because there's more of us? And I don't know, but I think it's an important thing to think about.
One thing that's really interesting about that too, a couple of things, when you talk about soft skills and the creativity and people. Women have more soft skills. Women are more creative. They like to do the girly things. That might fly in business and tech, but if you go to the agency side, which is all about creativity, or the media, which is all about writing and creativity, those are very top heavy with men as well. Mm-hmm. So it's not, I think that's a great excuse that a lot of people in business use to justify why women are in marketing. But it's not the universal truth when you look at other creative fields, film, television, entertainment, all male dominated.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's that broken rung that I was talking about, where like some of the data I looked at, like if you look at, it's that when you advance from either entry level or general manager level, the statistics just start to skew toward men as you get to director, VP, C level, even though the pool is smaller in marketing for sure. I didn't look at the other fields. But yeah, I think that's a really good point, Julie, that this plays out across multiple industries and multiple places where creativity and empathy, if that were the true, that only women have that, or we have that more, then why are the leadership positions even equally men and women, which is what the research that I found through most recent, like McKinsey and things like that, about the rule.
Yeah, agreed. But I'm curious, what was the point, the goal of his comment? I wish we could have him on to explain himself, just genuinely, what was his goal? Like, why share that, especially in a virtual room, mostly full of CMOs? Like, we're already in this path. There's no point to you saying that comment.
The context, Jane, if I remember it, it was around the difficulty right now in finding in like the competitive nature of the CMO roles, environment, hiring.
Yeah.
I think a lot of women were commenting in the chat about how long it's been taking to find roles. And I think it was more of a like, well, it shouldn't be that hard because, women would have the instant credibility. That's
so
how
a jab.
I took it. But again, I think we all have our own frame because I'm in that piece right now. So, but that was context.
Also, my gut reaction to it was, like hearing that, and that this man, this 3-time CMO, which is funny that he also felt the need to say that.
CEO. Yeah.
CEO. But this 3-time CEO that he shared this, my first reaction was, then I really want to become an engineer just to prove this guy wrong. Like it got me, I felt like challenged to go into the CFO path or the engineer path. I'm like, we can do that. I don't understand why you're pigeonholing us into only the CMO world on this CMO chat. But
yeah, well, he stated a very accurate fact, which is basically there are not enough women in STEM. So yes, that part is true, but that doesn't give instant credibility just by having or identifying with a certain gender. It's just, that's the part that I think just I keep
credibility.
Racking my brain. It's the credibility. Like it's unfortunately actually what the underlying message is, that you also have instant credibility as a CEO because you are a man. It's the same thing in reverse. So if a woman wanted to, found her own company or become an entrepreneur, be a CEO, well, now the company credibility kind of takes a hit because she's a woman. That's all, in reverse, that's really kind of the underlying message.
Wow, that's a really great observation, Dina. And having, again, come up through engineering school, and this was quite a while ago, but, being one of only a couple of women in a huge lecture hall of 300 people and, 300 men. I mean, you definitely get that singled out, have to extra prove yourself. To your point, Jane, I want to go prove myself. And I definitely have that gene, like, I'll show you. Yeah. But what I found was interesting is in those other disciplines, especially in technology, like in the tech side of the business, engineering or product. In my time when I was at Smartsheet, I was there for 4 years. I was a very visible senior marketing leader there. I mentored 7 women. They were all in the engineering group. And they were all just starved for some type of leadership and mentorship from someone who could understand what it feels like to be in that position, to just the general nature of being in those roles. So it was like the STEM, what I felt in college, that's still happening today, even though I went to college a few decades ago, like how it's still a part of it. And I, I don't know. I mean, I think of that as part of, I'm a stage in my career where trying to help women just gain that confidence and go past these barriers and perceptions and just charge ahead and apply for the job, even if you're not ready, and push your way in and just go get it is part of what I'm trying to do, whether it's somebody in a technology, somebody in marketing, founders, those types of things. We kind of owe it. I feel like I kind of owe it to people to just keep blazing forward past these kind of comments, to just prove them wrong, go for what you want, and don't be silent about it.
Well, question for all of you on the mentorship front. Seeing as how I think it almost triggered a tiny bit of PTSD for us, having experienced things like Julie and Karrie that you've just explained and shared. How would you suggest, if we encounter this from our CEO, or if a woman you're mentoring encounters a passing comment like this from the CEO, how should she respond? Any advice there? Karrie, I'll start with you.
I tend to respond with data, but humans are story. They respond to story, right? And so I'm more on the data side of marketing and the strategy, less storytelling. But I've gotten to learn to tell stories, and I think bringing data to the table, kind of like what I read off of, did you know, right? What data do you have about your own organization or about things in general? Like being thoughtful. And so if you're in that moment, if you're not ready in that moment, it's okay to say something to the effect of, you know what, I'm really interested in that comment you made. I want a little bit of time to regroup my thoughts, and can we set time to discuss it, right? You don't have to feel like you have to address it on the spot, which I think some of us always wish we had that pithy comeback. But it's okay to say to them, I want to unpack that comment. Can I set some time up? And then take some time and parse out what's an emotional reaction, and then bring some data to the table, either about your own organization or the industry in general, and tell them a story, right? Here's the data, and then let me give you a story associated with that and help them see it differently. And it's see how they react, right? If the reaction is like, oh, wow, did not know, want to do better, help me figure that out, that's great. If it's too bad, so sad, then that's a signal that you have to decide, after a couple of those moments, if it's the right place and organization for you. That's how I would recommend, and how I coach people to handle those things, and how I've handled it myself in the past.
Yeah.
I think that's a great piece of advice. So for me, I'm speaking from personal experience where, again, we kind of talked about how even different areas of marketing have different majorities, like gender majority, where event planning tends to be more female dominated. And even if you are not a event planner or field marketer where you're organizing conferences and hosted events and things like that, you might just be asked to organize lunch for the sales team, or try to make a reservation for a happy hour spot. Just even if you're not in marketing, it doesn't matter what role you are, what department you sit in. It's just kind of that default, unfortunately.
Note taking. We take notes.
Yeah. Yeah, the note takers, exactly. Yeah. Luckily, technology has kind of played a good role in that, and
AI.
Thank you. AI and Zoom and all the tools that just do note taking for you. But for those in-person meetings, I always tell my female colleagues to know their value. And if somebody asks you to organize a lunch or make a dinner reservation or find a happy hour spot or whatever, that's not like a customer-facing event where there's going to be some kind of revenue or pipeline growth. It's okay to say no and just say, my priorities are needed elsewhere. You be professional about it and not just be like, no, that's beneath me, even though it is.
Yeah.
It's more about knowing your value and say, my expertise, my priorities are needed somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's a really interesting point when you bring up the note taking. I recall very clearly being on a leadership team not that long ago where I was the only woman. And I came into the room a few minutes late, and they hadn't started the conference call yet. And I was like, well, why haven't you started? It was almost like they were waiting for me to get it going. And I'm like, you all know how to use the conference line, right? And it did spark an interesting discussion afterward about just their default behavior. It wasn't necessarily intentional, but they were just waiting for me to do it. And I was like, well, from now on, I'm never going to do it. So you all know how, figure it out. So it was an interesting...
Yes.
I think there's just unaware. Can you use those little moments, make a joke and point it out to people? That's funny. You just reminded me of that, Dina. It's like, oh yeah, why have you started the call?
Yeah.
I definitely have a story around that if we have time, but it still makes me cringe. This was like almost 12 years ago at this point. So, it's a bit earlier in my career. And I actually started, when I joined my first SaaS company, I actually started on the marketing operations side before moving into demand gen. And one of my colleagues was organizing, it must have been a kickoff, like a go-to-market kickoff. And they were planning like the evening event for all of the sales and marketing folks. And I guess the CRO had said, well, we don't need to hire more wait staff. We can just have the marketing team like hand out cocktails to everybody.
Ew.
Thank goodness somebody with a mind had the guts to stand up for us and say, no, that's not their job. They're not waitresses. That's why you hire and you host at a venue, because they have the wait staff. And it was just like very cringy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's also just remembering to be an ally in situations like meetings, because you'll see younger colleagues who get talked over, interrupted.
Yeah.
I was one of the people who said early in the pandemic, I hate what Zoom is doing to women in meetings, because they always get interrupted. But when you're in Zoom, the interruption is so much more profound and hard to get around that it ends up just kind of silencing people who don't speak up. And so being somebody who can say, your colleague, you said something, I'd like to hear, can you finish what you were saying? I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this. Or just, trying to gently say, can you wait just a minute? I want to hear what somebody else has to say here. I mean, it's about, you don't want to feel like you're a cop all the time in meetings, but it's about advocating for other people when you see behaviors happen that cause people not to share or speak up or be confident in their ideas.
Yes. So 2 quick things that I think were just touched on. One question I wanted to ask, we just touched on, is anything we can do as women leaders in marketing to combat this, I don't even know what to call it. I mean, this bias that obviously still exists. And 2 things I just pulled from what you all shared is making these teachable moments. So making sure to say something, even if you pause to collect yourself and not have a visceral emotional response, because, women are emotional. So to pause, collect your thoughts, but make it a teachable moment. I love that. And then second is advocating for your colleagues, for other women, for all groups that are undervalued and have a bias against them. So when they're in the room and when they're not, even more importantly, but standing up, like Dina, somebody stood up and said, no, the marketing team is not waitresses. We are not treating them as such at this event. And Julie, as you were advocating for your colleagues, so 2 big things that we can all do ourselves is speak up, make them teachable moments, and advocate for each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of these comments are really not meant to be malicious. I think one of you mentioned the abbreviation, the API. Sorry, remark. Say what?
Assume positive intent.
Assume positive intent. So I really do think that some of the comments are meant to be are just unknown, that they affect people differently. They're not going out of their way to bring somebody down. Totally. To my core, I genuinely feel that. But I think it's also making the same people understand the different points of view so they can see where that comment could potentially be troublesome. So it's a teachable moment in multiple ways.
Yeah. And words matter. So it's teaching them what words they use matter, and who you're saying them to matters, what room you're in. I mean, we're marketers, right? So know your audience. Who are you talking to? Adjust your message. Well, that message should never be said no matter who your audience is, but focus on your words.
Yeah. And sometimes using Julie. The turnabout and just saying, if somebody said that about you, how would you feel about that? Mm-hmm. Would you feel patronized? Would you feel insulted? Would you feel disregarded?
Yeah.
If it really gets to the point where most people are really, their intentions are good, and teaching them, they are like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that. I'm so sorry. I'll do better. But, if there's somebody who just really doesn't get it, because I have had people at times who are like, I don't understand why people don't like it when I say that. And it's like, well, put yourself in that comment and see how you feel.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Just reflection. So putting it back
and
on
it's interesting because it's up to I think the role model that we can be for not just marketers, right? The original thing was like, women have more credibility in marketing. How do you unpack that versus the other? When you get to a leadership role, VP, C-suite, whatever that is, I mean, you wearing a company hat, right? It's not just your department. And so how can you set an example of calm but firm and determined leadership to be more aware of how things make other people feel, about advocating and sponsoring folks that would typically either not feel comfortable raising their hand or be considered for things. It's, again, like the example I mentioned, like a lot of people I mentored weren't even in my marketing team because they just were like, okay, well, you're a senior leader who seems to be comfortable in her own skin and standing up in a way that doesn't feel defensive. I have definitely used can I get back to you on that? Because I'm flooded. It's like, I used to think about my toddlers, like they're flooded. You can't get through them right now. Like when I'm flooded to take a break and then think it through, which is why I love Jane. You're like, let's talk about this in a week or so after this comment resonates. It is a challenge.
It would have been a different recording.
Yeah, it is a challenge. And I try to pay, especially in the current environment where DEI is either being vilified or deprioritized, to the women who have, the intersectionality of race or ethnicity or sexual orientation, where they have that extra pressure, and the numbers bear out that they're even under more obstacles to growth and to opportunity. And how can we advocate for them, right? So that's part of like, what's the solution? Is a little bit of education, quite a bit of allyship and advocacy, and just understanding for your company or for the industry, what's the benefit of all this? I mean, that's the biggest point, is companies who have diversity at the gender, race, ethnicity, all the different angles you can take on that, they do better. Like the financial performance is better. The long-term performance is better. So this isn't just for the sake of, I want to sit at the table because me. It is literally better for business. And that to me is the ultimate point, is the stereotypes, the actions you take ultimately are better for not only the individual and the team, but for the company.
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally agree.
It's beyond optics.
Yeah. And it's
true.
Because people tend to think of it as a small conflict or a small discussion. And it's not about person to person. It's a bigger impact, the company, society, everything. Mm-hmm. And you're not saying it because you're offended or because you're getting defensive. It's because we all really need to think this way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Not being sensitive, right? As it might, like, oh, I'm getting defensive because I'm emotional or sensitive. No,
or
it's
those
just
women so sensitive.
Yeah, exactly. Related to what you were just touching on too, Karrie, a big question I have is, we were looking at the stats, right? I think in Korn Ferry 2018, it said exactly what you all touched on, that the CHRO and CMO were the two that skewed more female of the two roles of the C-suite, whereas CEO, CFO, CIO, CTO, drastically lower percentages, single digits in some cases. Why then, if there's more women in marketing and junior roles, as you said, Karrie, and still at least 50-50 in the CMO role, why are we still seeing more men than women on stages, on mics, and just speaking to marketing? The disparity is so confusing to me. And I think, to me, it's a call to all hiring managers and all event organizers and everybody who's putting people in certain positions and places and stages, is put more time and effort into it, because it's worth it. As Karrie said, not just for optics, although that matters a lot too. It's beyond. It's for better performance, better outcome, better attracting other talent, better attracting attendees if it's an event. It's just do better.
And it starts early in the pipeline. That's the thing. It's not just that last step between a VP and a CMO, or a director and a VP. Mm-hmm. There's actually, what I love digging into this, there's the Women in the Workplace report from McKinsey from 2023 that just came out, that has a lot of really interesting information about it. And it's like, there's this broken rung that for every 100 men promoted from just an individual contributor to a manager level, only 87 women, right? Like, it starts early. And then it's, if you get into like Black women, it's only 50 out of versus 100. So it's really, I think it starts early in the pipeline of people gaining that confidence to get that promotion if they want it, and that multi-leveled advocacy to get more people into the pipeline, whether it's women or somebody minority. And then big stages setting the example. SaaStr, they're amazing. When you apply to speak at SaaStr, the first thing they ask you is about diversity. If you're going to be an individual speaker, they prioritize people with unique experiences, unique points of view, or if you're going to run a panel. So you can do that, and they're wildly successful. So it's just a matter of understanding the value of that and then operationalizing it, not just at that last step, but from the very beginning in hiring and then in promotion.
I think there's also that mentality. It's very similar to women who apply for jobs. They feel like they have to hit 100% of the qualifications before they apply, where men are significantly more confident in their ability to do something, where even if they're only hitting 50 or 60% of the qualifications, still apply. I think it's very similar with conferences and those call to speakers where they probably undervalue what they bring to the table. And they're like, well, no one wants to hear me talk. What do I have to say? When in reality, they probably have plenty to say and bring tons of value, but they may not feel like they hit 100% of the bill.
Yeah. One of the things I struggle with in marketing is I'm sometimes the one who figures out who's going to be a speaker or who's going to be that representative on camera for us. Is a lot of men in marketing think of women in terms of quotas, or we have to get a woman to speak on this thing. It can be any woman. Here, she's cute. Let's put her up there. And it's no, part of this is understanding the value that every single person in your company brings to the table and where they matter, regardless of gender or race or anything else. And if you're just thinking of it as trying to fill a piece of a puzzle because somebody expects you to, you're doing a disservice to pretty much everybody in your company when you do that.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thank you so much for unpacking this with me. I mean, it's the very start or continuing a conversation that I'm sure we have been having for decades and will continue to have, hopefully for not too many more decades, because it's tiring. But thank you all for having this. Right. Is there any final thought that each of you wants to share, advice to listeners who have experienced something similar? I have listeners who are men, more progressive, because they're listening to a show called Women in B2B Marketing. So kudos to you all for being allies. But any advice on either side? Dina, I can start with you.
Nothing additional to what we haven't said already, but yes, please continue to be allies. If you are observing activities or situations that just make you feel uneasy, then probably something is going on and it would be good to speak up. And speaking up is not necessarily calling somebody out. It's simply, you know what? It's almost like that radical candor with your direct reports or with your team. Somebody's underperforming. You don't just let it go because you don't want to hurt their feelings or you think it's going to be, it's going to spark a negative conversation. You bring it up because you want that person to improve. And this is a very similar situation. The person who said or did something that may have not been the best comment, they probably did it unknowingly, and it needs to be addressed directly.
Yep. API. And Karrie, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with you, Dina. It's challenging because people are afraid to put themselves out there and speak up because what might it mean for them personally, right? I mean, challenging environment. You don't want to hurt your chances. So I would say to the leaders out there who are already in that position of leadership, whether you're a man or a woman, your actions are being watched and little moments can have really big cascading impact to the rest of the organization. I've seen that myself, where you stand up or say something to someone or follow up after and let them know that you did. It's an important piece. I think it has to start with leadership and thinking about it from top down. Again, it doesn't have to be a huge deal, but once people know about it, if you don't know, that's fine. But once you know better, you need to do better.
Exactly. And Julie, how about you?
I think in the spirit of assume positive intent, one of the things I love to say, and one of the things I actually said in that comment thread when that comment came up was say more, because I like to just open the dialogue with somebody and be like, tell me what what do you mean by that? Or, I'm just really curious. And a lot of times it's a way to open a healthy dialogue about it where the person actually understands themselves why it's a weird thing to say, and then says, that was weird and I shouldn't do that.
Yes.
I shouldn't say that. Or you don't have to call somebody out. Like Dina said, you could just open the dialogue to talk about it a little bit, because that's when people learn things in a non-threatening, non-confrontational way.
So smart. And I love the simple response of say more. That's almost allowing yourself to take that pause that we talked about, right? If you say more, maybe they can unpack it themselves.
Yeah, that's like
and you're just giving them that opportunity.
A code for my husband. When he hears me say more, he's like, oh shit.
He gets an eye twitch.
Thank you, Jane, for having
I love it. I'm going to start using that.
This is great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
And we'll see you again on the next roundtable. Thanks,
great.
everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.